Hi, Grandma here, and I'm reading It's a Jungle Out There by Ron Snell. And it's a story about growing up in the Peruvian jungles with missionary parents. And today's chapter is called Canoeing the Tushmo. And I always say I don't speak Spanish, I don't speak Mashiginga. I do look up most of the pronunciations and am doing my best. Okay, here's the photo that starts the page, the chapter off, and it's a picture of two blonde boys in the back, and that's Ron Snell when he was little and his brother Terry. Then they have a friend who is in the front of the canoe, who is one of the Native Americans in the Peruvian jungle. Chapter 7. I would never have voluntarily gone swimming in the Tushmo. It was a creepy inlet off Lake Yarincocha that wound its way beside and then behind our linguistics center. The bottom was so gushy that it sent prickles up and down my spine to think of ever putting my feet in it. There might be slithery creatures just waiting to chomp on bare toes. Trees hung over the narrow Tushmo. They were certainly picturesque, full of orioles, kingfishers, and buzzards, but it wasn't hard to imagine snakes and iguanas and spiders dropping on your head when you drifted under them. Certain seasons of the year, the edges of the Tushmo were pea green with algae. It was so thick that anything that fell in came out looking like a Martian. Then when lily pad season came, the Tushmo filled wall to wall with lily pads as if it had all been carpeted. You could hardly get a canoe through it. Of course, when the lily pad season ended, they all died and rotted, and a putrid smell filled the inlet. Still, sometimes the Tushmo was a great place to canoe and fish, even if not to swim. In fact, the only time I could ever remember purposely swimming in it was at night when we were hunting alligators. In the darkness, you couldn't see all the yucky stuff, so it wasn't nearly as so scary, but that's another story. One Saturday morning, Mom thought it would be fun to go on a family outing in the aluminum canoe. We'd been on furlough for a year, and it was such a relief to be back in the jungle. For us kids, furloughs were a kind of necessary evil with a few really nice benefits. We did a lot of traveling while our parents visited family, friends, and supporters all over the United States. In exchange for pretending we were excited to visit people we didn't know, including our relatives, we got to see lots of famous things between the Liberty Bell and the California Redwoods. It wasn't that our parents, friends, and family weren't nice to us. Many of them went out of their way to help us feel welcome and entertained. It just wasn't very easy for them to figure out what to do with three little Indians. Now, who are the three little Indians they are talking about? They're not really Indians. It's really Ronnie, his brother Terry, and their sister, whose name I've already forgotten. I know one sister's name, but I don't think that's the same sister. Anyway, they have a baby sister. Dad and Mom talked about their work in Peru, and we climbed their friends' trees. We learned about Dairy Queen, A&W root beer stands in between slideshows at churches. Terry got hit by a truck when he and I were off shopping for ice cream sticks. Melody, that was the only name I could remember. But Melody was born in Indiana, where Mom's parents lived. I started school, and that's all I remember. We were homesick the whole time. So they left Peru with 3 children, and they're coming back with 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. The fact that Terry and I were both school age when we got back to Peru was going to change our lives. Instead of getting to be in the tribe whenever our parents were, we would only get to be there during vacations from school. The rest of the time, they were away from Yarincocha, which was usually between September and December. We would stay in the children's home, about a 5-minute walk away from our own house. There were many kids who lived in Yarincocha full-time. Their parents helped staff the school, fly and maintain the airplanes, repair radios, print school books for the Indians, administer the work, and so on. For the rest of us, the children's home wasn't such a bad place to be, even if we did prefer the tribe. It was kind of like living with a bunch of cousins, since the same kids ended up there for a few months each year. We had a lot of fun together. In fact, sometimes kids whose parents lived in Yarincocha full-time wished their parents would leave for a while so they could live in the children's home. A lot of neat things happen when you get a dozen missionary kids together in one house for 3 months. I think maybe we enjoyed some of those things more than the house parents did. I'm sure of that. Like the rug rides we gave each other on the slick waxed mahogany floor in the huge living room. I especially remember one night when we had a bit of a catastrophe with a rug. It was several years later, after Sandy had started staying, and that's the sister, I couldn't remember her name, after Sandy had started staying in the children's home with us. Sandy was sitting on the rug holding one end of a rope. She was tough as nails and would never admit she was afraid. So she was a pretty good rug rider. I'm going to see how fast I can get you going. Don't you dare let go of the rope. I knew she wouldn't, even if her life depended on it. I grabbed the other end of the rope and kind of trotted her around the room to get her going. The tip of her tongue stuck out as she concentrated on holding on. Once she started gaining speed, I could move closer to the middle of the room and just swing her around me like a sling. For a few fabulous seconds, she went so fast the rug nearly came off the floor like a flying carpet. Her hair blew in the wind and her mouth couldn't decide whether to smile or shriek. Then, for some reason, her hands slipped and off she flew like a rock out of a slingshot. On her way to crashing into a wall, she took out a dining room table leg, 2 little kids, and a couple of chairs. I guess that's what the children's home parents didn't like about it, even though Sandy got right up with a big grin on her face. Another great game for that many kids was SWAT. What do you think SWAT's going to involve? We'll see. We turned off all the lights in the house and used magazines to whack anyone who got close enough. One night, our temporary mother, that would be the house mother that is in charge of the children's home, walked into the living room in the middle of the game and got pretty beat up before we realized who she was. Well, it was her fault for not having her own magazine. Anyway, my folks were pretty good about trying to find fun things to do as a family when we could to make up for the times when we were apart. The outing in the aluminum canoe was probably meant to be one of those things, but I'm not sure it was such a great idea, at least in hindsight. At the time, we thought it would be a lot of fun. Melody was too young to go, and Dad stayed home with her, but the rest of us all piled in. Since there were 4 of us, we invited our friend Tim Townsend, or Towner, to come along as well. Mind you, we weren't crazy about the aluminum canoe. It was slippery, noisy, and tippy. But it was all we could find to borrow on short notice, and it could carry a pretty good load, which it was doing on this trip. We headed straight for the Tushmo. For half an hour or so, we paddled up the Tushmo, chattering, dipping our hands in the water to tempt the piranhas. And remember, piranhas are flesh-eating fish. The inlet narrowed as we went until we could almost reach out and touch branches on both sides of us. Fish jumped, birds sang, and the canoe leaked. The aluminum canoe always leaked. We more or less glided along in a zigzag line because the canoe was hard to keep straight. It wasn't exactly a quiet, peaceful trip. Every time we ran into a submerged log or branch, which was pretty often, we could hear it scraping the aluminum all the way from stem to stern. The canoe tipped and bumped, and when it did, Mom most emphatically told everyone to sit down or we'll tip over. No one wanted to tip over in the Tushmo, of course, for all the reasons I explained before, but we really didn't want to just sit down the whole way either. Since there was a village at the upper end of the inlet, other canoes passed us now and again. They gave us a wide berth as they went by, as they thought maybe we'd tip too far and end up in their canoes. Our style didn't inspire confidence, but we did get some big smiles. Having pretty much run out of paddling room and ways to scare Mom, we turned around and headed for home. We went faster now, even if not much straighter, because we were getting more confident, because it was fun to see how big a bow wave we could make. Water lapped over the sides and a gentle breeze blew our hair, and I'm sure Mom wondered why she had ever suggested this. Well, sounds like it was a pleasant day. But I still have 2.5 pages to go. So what do you think happens? Do you think they just quietly paddle along? Do you think they meet friends in another canoe? Do you think they tip their canoe? Do you think an iguana falls in their canoe? Well, let's read on and find out. Suddenly, just as we were about to exit the Tushmo and paddle back into the friendlier waters of the lake, we hit a big log that was hidden just under the surface. It happened so fast that before we knew what hit us, or rather what we hit, the right side of the canoe tipped right down to where water gushed in over the side. In a desperate effort to stay dry, most of us jumped out. We teetered back and forth and our wet feet thrashed on the slippery bottom of the canoe before Mom could yell, "Sit down!" We had all fallen into the creepy Tushmo. If ever I had wished to walk on water, that was it. But there was no time to think about it, what with both the canoe and Sandy sinking. "Somebody help Sandy!" shouted Mom, who could stand up in the neck of deep water. I grabbed Sandy and perched on the log that had dumped us so I wouldn't have to put my feet down. Terry and Towner emptied the canoe while Mom waded to the shore, amazingly uneaten by anything. Mom never got back in. She and Sandy walked home on a trail and left us 3 boys to paddle the canoe back to its dock. I wish I could say we paddled straight back as Mom expected. It would have saved us all a lot of grief, but that isn't what happened. More adventures? I only have 1.5 pages to go. We couldn't resist the chance to get a little more practice swamping the canoe, so we paddled right out into the middle of the lake where the wind was blowing and the waves were high. I suppose we should have gotten permission first, but as my dad always says, it's easier to get forgiveness than permission. For the next hour, while our parents and Towner's parents worried about us, we had the time of our lives. We tipped the canoe over every way we could, emptying it between dumps. Sometimes while it was upside down, we'd swim underneath it and hide, breathing the trapped air and making ear-piercing screams in the aluminum hull. I suppose it might have looked from a distance that we'd all drowned, and the canoe was just floating there. When we finally heard someone shouting from the high bank a couple 100 yards away, it didn't sound as if they were in a good mood. We could barely make our 4 parents' faces as we headed in their direction, and the closer we got, the more unhappy they looked. They obviously had not come to welcome us back home. We tied up the canoe, climbed the steep bank. My dad's first intelligible words were, "Your goose is cooked." I hadn't heard that expression before, but I assumed he wasn't talking about lunch. Well, we got yelled at and spanked and guilt-ridden, but I reckon if you've never done anything worth getting spanked for, you haven't lived. Besides, when I think of all the things my parents let us do in the next few years, I can't for the life of me figure out what was so awful about that hour of fun we had hiding under the canoe in the middle of the lake. I think they were just worried about us, and the only way they could show it was to spank us. I think he's right. I think they really thought they were in trouble or that they had drowned. And, you know, when parents, sometimes when they're angry or when they're concerned or fearful, will act as if they are just angry rather than concerned and worried. Okay, that's the end of this chapter. It was a kind of a quick read. The next chapter is called Man of the House, chapter 8. And I think we get to learn more about the two sisters, Melody and Sandy. Where does it look like they are doing? I think it looks like they're going for a walk. Now, if you're worried about Sandy's dress being so short, that's the way little girls wore their dresses back then. I'm more concerned about Melody wearing that big man shirt that she's wearing. Wonder what happened to her dress and her clothes. Maybe we'll find out in the next chapter called Man of the House. Bye-bye.